This is the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. Episode 160, recorded June 13th, 2018. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com, or if you can't access it through that, through the TotalScreen.blogspot.com. We're still having some DNS issues I need to fix. But this is our podcast where we talk about the latest in TV. Today, we're going to be talking about Westworld Season 2, Episode 8, Kiksuya. And joining me today as special guest are Alex.
Hi.
And Mike.
Good evening. How's it going?
And I'm your host, Tyson. Let's get started. Just right into the episode, or right into general discussion first. But Mike, we talked to Alex last week, and I started the same way with him as I'm going to start with you now. How did you get into Westworld? Did you start as it aired, or did you binge it?
No, I binged it. I had a friend who has HBO Go and had already watched it and wanted to rewatch it. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm in on that. So I probably did in 3-hour increments, just going through the first season. And that's how I got through it.
I bring that up just because there's this very different experience that a lot of people have when they watch Westworld, where people that watched it week to week, a lot of them have a lot of complaints about the show because of the way it cuts off episode to episode. But people who binged it seem to have not had any issues at all with that.
I'm definitely in that camp for season 1. And season 2, now I'm watching it weekly, except for the past couple of ones. My Westworld meal ticket was on a trip, so I got to watch the last 2 or 3 episodes right in a row. And it's better that way. It is absolutely better.
Yeah, it's definitely a better show for binging than for week to week. We're going to be talking pretty much exclusively about Kiksuya, season 2, episode 8, but we might go into some of the other episodes as well, just because we'll be talking about storylines and stuff.
Right.
So right off the bat, I'm going to say, and I don't know if you guys agree or not, this is the best episode of Westworld I've ever seen.
Ooh, bold. I would say episodes this season, 4 and 7, were the high points, but this is really, really good. I wasn't expecting this late in the season to sort of get a character study like this. I did really like it, though.
Yeah, it took a very different approach than the progression we've been having so far, which has been very serialized, straightforward. And then this episode, like you said, it's a character study, and it just kind of starts with events and things that have happened throughout the entire run of the show so far, but you're just seeing it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And I really dug it. I liked the concept of it, of exploring it through this Native American character that seems kind of unconnected to all the other craziness that's going on, but then you see kind of where he is connected to it. And that's been kind of a question throughout the end of last season, has been the role of the Native American host in this in this whole thing, because they seemed like they kind of had some level of knowledge towards the end of season 1 that it's okay, they seem like they're onto something, but we just don't quite know what.
Well, weren't there times in season 1 where they go out into the park and they would not, Ghost Nation would not respond to the voice commands? Am I misremembering that? I would have sworn something like that happened in season 1.
I think I only remember that happening when they captured Ashley Stubbs, the head of security, at the end of last season, where he kept giving voice commands and they just kept walking towards him.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
There's always been some kind of hint that they know more. There have been kind of almost this religious aspect in the first season where they talked about the angels or these figures or something, referring to the Delos people coming in and resetting the scenes and stuff. But showing okay, well, these Native American hosts seem to have a little bit more knowledge than a lot of people do outside of Maeve and Dolores.
Well, it's interesting because they had, like you said, very separate. They're just sort of on the periphery of the plot. But as was revealed in this episode, they sort of woke up, or he did, separately from how Dolores and Maeve did. He basically did it left to his own devices. What was what did Ford say? A flower growing in the dark, something like that?
Yeah.
So they've got all of these different paths to consciousness, and I thought that was a really neat inclusion this time.
It was basically the same tool that Bernard used, or Arnold, I guess, used to try to wake up Dolores initially, when she had him kill him and everything. It's just the same tools he used to wake her up, except without any of his guidance in trying to wake her up. So it was just like he stumbled upon the symbol and then became obsessed with it. And then he like just had these different experiences throughout the park. So Alex, you've been a little bit quiet. What's going on with you?
No, I'm happy to learn, man. I was, I liked the episode a lot overall. I did think, I'm with Mike. I don't think it was the best one like you did, but I thought it was a really good episode. And Mike put it well by saying it's a character study. I think it works. It's almost the kind of episode that could work in any show, except that, it's using the conceits of this show, which is this guy's, he's not human. He's a robot. He's in this fake world. So just using all the premises, they managed to make a really nice, I guess, story of loss for this character.
They were able to give us this interesting perspective on so many of these events that have occurred and just kind of the way things occur in this. And you really get the sense of like, just because the Native American characters are kind of so separated from the rest of the happenings in the park, they're not as socially connected with the guest as the other hosts are that are like in the towns and stuff, that they really did feel like they were their own species and stuff. So for them, like the loss of that seems almost like harder. The idea that like all of this is fake is like even harder for them, but they're not necessarily even in that perspective. Like they discovered like, okay, well, this is the wrong world. They don't even have like the same exact perspective that like Dolores does. That like understanding the idea of the theme park part of it. Like they don't even necessarily have a direct connection to that part of it.
I thought one thing that these guys, Akecheta's story did really well was kind of bring home the pain that a lot of these hosts feel when they lose loved ones, but they might not remember them, right? It's just like a distant memory. Other people in his tribe were noticing, just kind of like subconsciously noticing that their loved ones were missing and they were feeling the pain for them and all of these things. Before we had a sense of that just through Maeve, but it was very much her personal story. With this guy, he specifically told us like he realized that this is what a lot of hosts felt, right? And they were made to feel. And so I think it just really brings home this like collective resentment that the hosts have at their loss.
Well, and it's the beautiful scene where he goes to find Kohana in deep freeze, and he's so sad to see her. But then he steps back and he sees all of these other hosts, and everybody, they had relationships outside in the park, and there's people that miss them and wonder where they are. And you can just see it dawn on his face. It was a masterful acting.
He walked through groups of them, but it's like he had tunnel vision. He was just looking for her. Yeah. And then like you said, it dawned on him. And like he said that he came to realize that his needs were selfish, so that it was just that everybody was having the same experience that he was.
Yeah.
I like that. And I like the idea that like, that's when he kind of started on this quest, the idea of like waking up others, and that he's basically built like himself this army, the Ghost Nation of just people that are all now, at least to some extent aware, at least to some extent woken up.
And it sort of ties in to what you're talking about earlier, them, being separate, a different breed of hosts, really. And kind of that is Akecheta's, or I know I'm mispronouncing that name and I'm murdering it, but that's sort of his doing, is he's keeping his tribe away from this. And these host isn't reset until they die. So he's keeping them out there. He's waking them up. He's teaching them. And that necessarily puts them away from what they're normally doing. And they've sort of been able to grow and become as close to a real tribe as you can be.
We were mentioning Maeve, and Maeve's story crossed over a lot here with the story that was going on. Like, it was the one character that they could make a direct parallel to, because the question we had was, why did Akecheta or Akecheta or whatever his name is, why did he take Maeve's daughter in that one scene? And why did he express to Maeve that they were on the same path? And those were kind of like the questions we had about Ghost Nation, because we knew like he wasn't just attacking her, even though Maeve was like terrified that that's what was happening. And we got kind of the resolve on that. Not just that, but the idea like that Maeve was terrified of Ghost Nation and had this PTSD about them attacking her, but that was all just a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the whole episode was basically framed, was that it begins with the character finding William and taking him back to the camp. And then you see in the camp also it is Maeve's daughter, and she's terrified, and he's kind of just telling her his story. And that's like the whole framing device for the entire episode, is you're getting his narration over events as they're occurring, explaining like why he took the path he did, when he did certain things, and then relating it back to her. And that's when you find out that she pretty much saved him when he was at like his wit's end, when he was at like his lowest. Mm-hmm. And he felt indebted to her. And this is where it's caused this confusion for Maeve, where Maeve thought that she should fear him, was because they showed up and it was all, the whole situation was confused when he was really trying to warn her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've sort of, the whole tribe is kind of trying to be a protector for some of the hosts, and it's just not working out because they're being killed and reset all over the time. They can't learn anything like Ghost Nation has learned. Mm-hmm. They're always back in the labs being reset and having their firmware updated.
Yeah.
Misunderstanding.
Yeah. I was a little disappointed that, what's his name, William, was unconscious for the entire episode, because I feel like if he had heard this story of Akecheta, he would have realized that he's not, William believes that he's playing this masterful game set in motion by Ford, right? Following these labyrinthine signs and stuff. He's like, oh, I'm finding these symbols, these Easter eggs, and I'm on the right path. But in reality, that has just been the path of Akecheta, right? As he's been trying to spread the truth.
Yeah.
So
he's been putting the maze everywhere for him to watch. Run.
Yeah. So William actually has no place in this story other than his own delusion. He just really wants to beat the game, but there is no game. It's all about the awakening of these machines.
Yeah, they weren't really able to give him like an encounter that would affect his experience with that. Though I don't know if you saw like the preview for next week.
I did not.
I didn't.
I wouldn't dare.
Okay.
Point.
All I'll say is that I think that they have probably more story for William to go through before they get to any kind of moment where he can realize where he's wrong or where he's fallible,
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot we need to find out about him and his daughter.
Yeah.
That's going to be the next episode, because she's not happy with him after being abandoned.
She's not happy
think they're reconciling. Yeah, and I can't blame her. So that's an interesting point, of like, well, where does William fit in this? Is there really more of a role for him within the park, or has he just been trying to figure out a game that he has absolutely no role in at all?
I think this is my theory on it, and this is specific to this season. I think Robert Ford has regrets about how William turned out. That he kind of sees it as like his park, in a way, opened William up into becoming this like bad person. And that he kind of feels some level of regret about that. And I feel like it's almost as if Robert Ford like hates him, but at the same time feels guilty. And it's almost like he's creating a redemptive arc for him to play through.
I could see that.
I don't know if that's supposed to like leave William like, knowledgeable and seen as a good person again, or if it's specifically to then, turn the screw and say, okay, well now you've seen how much you've caused, how many problems you've caused, what you've done. You've come to the point where you can emotionally empathize again, and now you're screwed. Like I don't know if it's like if it's Robert Ford's way of really turning the knife in him, or if it's Robert Ford's way of like trying to make up to him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of feel like that's
we'll find that out.
We should find that out. I'm sure that's something that's going to conclude this season.
Mm-hmm. Tune in next week to find out.
Yeah.
What else do we have going on in this episode? I mean, it's mainly focused, like we said, on Akecheta's journey with his love and trying to find her. And the first time he becomes aware of it, he's already been turned into a member of the Ghost Nation, more the warring Indian tribe, where he was more of like a peaceful Indian before, or a Native American before. And now he has this role where he's like, killing and scalping and stuff to fit more into the storylines that are going on in Westworld. And
yeah, because that was an interesting juxtaposition of how they brought in old elements from season 1, where when the park is an alpha, basically, when Arnold kills himself, he stumbles into that. And Ford kind of is guilty for, turning him into a mass murderer. He has to make him more interesting, more bloodthirsty, and for the crowds that are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
That's in some ways I think why Ford is so impressed with him when we see that really cool still image, well, not a still image, still scene at the tail end of the episode where Akecheta comes to him and sort of gets the last pearls of wisdom of, hey, get yourself ready.
It's like a museum tableau with like all the Indians like basically facing off against a bear and they're just frozen. And Ford's just sitting there like with no emotion or thought to it, just scalping them and looking at, because the Ghost Nation had been planting the symbol in like their scalps.
Yeah, that's
earlier.
Which seems a really painful way of doing that. So was Akecheta just like, scalping all of his fellow people in the tribe, tattooing the maze on the inside and then sewing it back on their heads? Is that what was happening?
Either that or he was like partially scalping them, putting that in there, and then if they died or something, then letting the park repair them, but without maybe necessarily noticing the symbol. And then we don't really know the full details on how that passed under the surface or under the radar. But it all ties back into even like William's arc in the first season when he had scalped a character and that had the symbol on the inside of the scalp, and that's how he kind of began his journey. Yeah,
and how he thought this was all some big game, in some way planted by Ford, but it has nothing to do with Ford, really.
Yeah,
he's just been following the breadcrumb trail of Akecheta.
Yeah, it's interesting how William kind of perceives everything as being about this game that's between him and Ford, he believes, or like the game of Bernard's that he's trying to play. And from the first season, or Arnold, I should say, trying to play it from the first season, and now Robert Ford's
Bernarnold.
Yeah, Bernarnold. But he kind of he thinks it's all that. So his daughter comes to see him. He thinks, this is like, something that Robert's doing in order to interfere with the speed of my progress.
Yeah. Yeah, he sort of gets knocked down a peg. He thinks so much of this is about him, and it's some sort of vendetta between him and Ford this whole time. And it's not. He had other priorities going on.
He's tied deeply into everything that's going on, but it's not in the way he thinks, It's
exactly.
It's in the mistakes he's made, basically, and like how that ties him into everything else. Like we know that the valley at the end that basically everybody in this whole season's been racing towards, that seems to be the gateway what Akecheta was calling the door or the gateway in this episode. That seems to be the valley beyond it. It's the same place where we saw the flooded sea, I think in like, what was it, the end of the first episode of the season?
1 or 2 where we find Teddy just floating in the water.
Yeah. And so it's like it's a place we've seen a lot, and we've seen it kind of terraformed or changed to kind of look like different areas at different times, to hide what it actually is. And we know that the sea is something that kind of happens somewhere between where the story is for us right now and where like the present of the story is, that, the furthest ahead in the future that we've seen the story, we've seen it already flooded. And what causes that flooding, what that represents and stuff is what we haven't seen yet. That's like the story we still have to go in the main plot.
It's the end of the season, basically, right?
Yeah. We saw that at the very beginning it was the last shot basically of the first episode, and everything's basically leading up to that, to what made it that way. Like, it's all about discovering that, the machinations that caused that, because they said like, how could this giant sea pop up without anybody noticing, like making like a big deal about it. And we know that this is also something that William referred to as like his biggest mistake.
Yeah, young William took Dolores there, didn't he?
Yeah.
And pointed it out. So Dolores already knows about this place, and that's why she's going there. She's accessed her memories, but she hasn't had any sort of soliloquy of telling us what really is there in the Valley of the Beyond and why she needs to go there.
Yeah, that's what we don't know. I mean, it seems to be possibly related to whatever Delos's project was to like create eternal life, apparently.
Perhaps like the records of all the guests that have come in. The hosts have been recording everything, uploading it to some sort of cloud file or something. And
or bodies. It could be like a different version of the cradle, which we had seen a couple weeks ago. So it could be like a different version of that. But it's not something that was created by Robert Ford. It's something that was created by William. He's the one that kind of claims credit for that. But everybody's kind of on the path to like encounter this. Akecheta is on that path in order to try to like free his people. Dolores is on that path for a similar reason, but like in a more vindictive and vengeful kind of way. everyone's kind of going there in different paths. But what was really interesting in this episode is that in his conversation, Akecheta's conversation with Robert Ford, he referred to Dolores as the Deathbringer. And he said when the Deathbringer killed the creator, referring to Arnold, because he had seen their bodies laid out, that's when he, when he woke up as well, or part of when he woke up. So Robert Ford was saying, well, you need to get to this valley, upon my signal, you need to take your people and find this gate. And then he says, Akecheta says again, talking about the gate or the door, saying that they needed to get there before the Deathbringer. So he's not aligned with Dolores, even though they're both hosts looking for freedom, he's not aligned with her at all. In his mind, she's like the devil that he needs to beat there to that location.
Yeah. And as for hosts waking up, there are three very different bases. Akecheta, as much as I suppose that the pacifists a just woken up being both just and being a woken up host, Dolores has gone a little power mad and bloodthirsty, and Maeve is sort of in the middle, where she'll spill blood if she has to. And she sort of got her revenge kick out of the way on a lot of the humans earlier. She seems to be, somewhat at least, toned down at this point.
She's just worried about her daughter at this point.
Yeah. And, and speaking of her, that's the last scene of the episode, last scene of this episode, right? Where she says, take my heart when you go. So she's been listening through whatever the neural mesh network is the whole time to the story. And, maybe Akecheta even knows that he might even be talking to her because of that network.
I think he does, because he directly said, if you can make it here, then we'll be holding your daughter for you for when you arrive. And if you can't, then have a good death.
You're right. You're right.
So I thought that was a very interesting power up for her. We knew, she went from just being, just from being woke to being able to relay commands to other hosts, telepathically. Now she can straight up communicate telepathically to any other host.
She's got that gigabit Wi-Fi.
Yeah, she's on FiOS. She's on that.
She's admin privileges, man.
Yeah. Basically, she literally has admin privileges, right? They did say that.
They did reference that basically everybody's locked, they've been locked out. And the only thing that is that still has those privileges, that still has that access, is Maeve. And they got the code and they're trying to use that. And that's kind of interesting story we have too, because we have Lee, the head of narrative, exposing what Maeve can do, basically in his desperation for them to save her. And then instead they're just we got the code from her. We don't need to save the body. That doesn't mean anything. But then he holds on to the body, and Charlotte comes down. He brings her down and he's explaining it to her. And then they realize that she is in active communication with somebody at that point. And that's when we get that scene.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
This idea that, these hosts are turning into a sort of superhuman hive mind. It's pretty terrifying. So I guess it's good that Maeve is somewhat benevolent.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Yeah. Because we don't know. Now that she's been listening to this story and, fully understanding how every host has gone through these many decades of suffering loved ones, the loss of loved ones, and, this anguish that they've been going through. I guess she's going to be put in a situation where she's going to make a choice, I guess a choice about her ideals, what she believes she needs to do, whether that aligns with Dolores or something else that's going to play out, right?
And I think we're going to discover where she stands on that based on how she reacts to Lee when she's conscious again, which is basically is she going to see what he did as a betrayal? Because he did betray her. He called in backup and stuff. He's all, this is it. I'm getting out of here. And he called it backup. And even though he was trying to protect her at the same time, it wouldn't have even been a problem at all if he had just stayed out of it. But he didn't. He called for backup and did this. And is she going to see this as a betrayal and hate him? Or is she going to see how much he's doing to try to save her as something that she can, forgive his betrayal and see that he was literally trying to protect her, at least in this case. And that's going to give us a really good idea of how Maeve sees humanity as a whole.
Lee has the real moment of contrition there at the end too. You know, you belong with your daughter. You need to be left alone and left in peace. So is that going to have any bearing on Maeve perhaps letting him live, basically? She's gonna, when Maeve finds, you know, Maeve's not going to be on that table much longer. She's going to get up and she's not going to be happy. So does she forgive him for what he has done, for that contrition, for realizing that they're as human as humans are, really? Or is she going to go down Dolores's path?
So here's my hot take, man. My hot take is she might not even get up from the table. Like the way that she is able to communicate telepathically to all these other hosts. And this comes from reading like William Gibson novels and stuff like that. I think she could basically become a sort of like mother AI, right? To a lot of these, sort of like the OS for a lot of these hosts. I told you it's a hot take.
She becomes the host god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's the Windows 10.
But wouldn't she have to sort of like transcend into the, what's the mainframe where they host stuff that got blown up last episode?
The cradle?
Yeah, the cradle.
Yeah, something like that.
That's been destroyed, as far as we know.
But also that all of the hosts have like a local area network that they can communicate wirelessly with each other, and that's
she lives on the cloud.
Right? That's what she's doing it, but she still needs some sort of host body to be able to be on that Wi-Fi,
unless she's distributed.
True. Yeah, exactly. So she could. This could have something to do with what's going to happen in the Valley Beyond. You know, we don't know exactly what's there, but it could have something to do with her transcendence. If that is, you know, if William Gibson wrote this story, which apparently the writers of the show are huge William Gibson fans, and they really just keep wanting to do his work, you know, in TV shows. So I think it's
Scorching
possible.
Scorching hot take. You may be right.
She's the mother brain.
No. That'll work. You know,
she's going to attack Samus. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and the thing is that
maybe Metroid.
I think it kind of works because of the fact that her character arc has been of her realizing that she was a mother, and of her having like all these motherly traits to her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm obviously reading too much into that, but I think she could play the part of mother to a lot of these hosts in that sort of omniscient sense.
It's Westworld, man. You can't read too much into it. It's impossible.
Yeah, and she already did make like kind of a sacrifice in that. In the end of the first season, she was almost out, like joining the real world, out of the park, and then she got that kind of information on where her daughter is, and it's like just when she thought she was out, she gets pulled back in, and she's like right back into the park, and she's kind of like sacrificed her own personal ambitions in order to like save her daughter. That's kind of like her entire arc in season 2. So for her to sacrifice her body, her singular identity to become a greater kind of entity above the host, as you said, like a mother brain to the host, would make sense with kind of the journey she's been taking already.
Yeah, to be a mother to all of them.
It's funny you said when she thought she was out, she gets pulled back in. That's how I felt with episode 7.
You're like, oh, I'm done with this.
I'm out of here. Mm-hmm.
Then they do that to you. But that's interesting though. What Maeve has is she sort of hacked herself in season 1, and she's walking away, and goes back to the whole thing Ford talks about. You need suffering or whatever to truly, have a sort of center, and that's what pulls her back into the park. She makes that choice. And that's kind of what fully, I think, wakes her up. She was awake before. She had been she turned up all of her parameters as far as they would go or whatever. But making that choice to go back, that's what makes her the most human, because that's her pivot right there. She could have left, you're right, but she didn't. And now she's in this.
We still have like a little bit of unanswered questions about that whole situation. And I always bring this up because it's one of the things I'm most curious about. But like when she was leaving, they were finding bits in her code that were like pushing her to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, if that was code that was written for her and not like her own code, then what entity or what person or thing is trying to pull her out of Westworld, and why?
Is she sort of Ford's backup plan, maybe, to just in case.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be another Delos related thing, because there was all that trying to smuggle certain bits of information out of Delos. So it could be a number of things, or an entirely different party that we're not yet aware of, even. But that's something that I think is going to end up having to come into play. I bet that's probably going to be like a storyline point in season 3.
Mm-hmm. You know, these guys are fans of William Gibson. There's going to be another AI somewhere out there in the world. Some Wintermute.
And they did that too, like the Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, who created this show. They did Person of Interest before, and that was heavily about two warring AIs.
Yeah, and their next one is another William Gibson novel, right? The Peripheral.
Yeah.
So, no, man, these guys just love that stuff.
Yeah, so that's entirely possible that the third season is going to get, because you have to wonder, like, how are they going to do a third season now? I mean, that was the whole thing people questioned with season 2. It's like, okay, they're awake, they're rebelling. Is that just going to be the entirety of season 2? Is just them rebelling? Like, when are they going to leave? How are they going to, like, affect humanity at this point? Season 2 is kind of like about exploring that awakening further for like large groups of people, and kind of like the conflicts of like how to get out of there, and what they might or might not need to do that. But what's that going to leave for season 3? Like at that point, you know, are they just going to be completely out of the area? I mean, at that point, it's not really Westworld anymore. I mean, they're going to be riding around on horses in the middle of like a technologically advanced Hong Kong or something.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because they've also done pretty much all the origin story in season 2, which I didn't think they were going to do. They gave us, you know, how Westworld came into being financially. They gave us why it exists, what the hosts are there for. All that's been revealed already. So what do you have left for season 3 after this?
Yeah, and they've also given us a really good idea about where Westworld is. I mean, there were people that were thinking that it was on Mars. Like, there are a lot of fan theories about that. It's like, we pretty much know now that it's probably on one of the contested islands in the Chinese Sea. There are these contested islands between like Japan, Korea, and China, and in like the Sea of Japan and China, in that general vicinity. And it's probably one of those islands that they're using for Westworld, because we've seen that the Chinese government is somehow connected. We saw that in the first episode of this season, where they had, like, the Chinese government had shown up, and they were like, they had concerns, and they were arguing with that one Delos agent that had shown up. And we know that Bernard was building his home in Hong Kong to be near Westworld. So yeah, so it's like we have this kind of idea of like where they are now and stuff. So that means like if they do leave Westworld, then they're probably going to be somewhere in the Chinese Sea or the Sea of Japan, like in that vicinity, you know? So are they going to go to Hong Kong at that point? Are they going to just go full cyberpunk?
That'd be a hell of a juxtaposition with Ghost Nation walking out into cyberpunk Hong Kong. That'd be great. I'd watch that.
Because we know like that's another thing that we got, another piece of information we got, is that when Logan was approached by Bernard's host, he was originally going to use Dolores to do it, and then ended up instead using Angela, the one that greeted William when he first showed up at Westworld, as well as, oddly enough, Akecheta, who we see now. He was one of the hosts too. It was the two of them that basically introduced Logan to what Westworld was capable of. And when they did that, so this is like the very beginning of Westworld, basically. When they did that, he was saying, he's like, yeah, everybody wants our money for VR, AR. So he's basically setting that period, like the origin of Westworld, like in the present for us.
Yeah, when they were doing that meeting, you know, he said, no one's here yet. Nobody's here yet. This is 10, 20 years away, and they're here now. So yeah, I mean, it's not, that meeting took place not too far in the future from where we would conceivably be now.
Yeah, it's around that same, it's the same topics that we're discussing now in tech is what they were discussing. And then we know that was about 50 years ago in the timeline for the story from what's the present story.
Yeah, long enough for Ford to get older.
Yeah, for Ford to get older, for William to get older, for all that to happen. So it's going to be interesting. I keep thinking that we're going to get some kind of a weird version of Future World, because in the books for Westworld, there was like Future World was part of it. The idea of like, or the film, I guess, that there was the idea of Future World was one of the parks or something. And I think they're going to approach that not with an actual like theme park, but with, I think what they're going to do is it's going to be like a version of the Cradle that's for the billionaires of the world that are like want to be immortal, and their consciousnesses have been copied into a mainframe, you know, like that it's going to be kind of like their version of the cradle. And we saw like what the cradle looks like on the inside for Bernard. It's basically Westworld. It's all of the host, and they're living in Westworld because that's what's familiar to them. So when they're in their hive mind state and they're all together in the cradle, it's what they're used to. It's their world. But what would the cradle be then for these rich billionaires and stuff from around the world? Like, you can't just like say, oh yeah, you've been in Westworld like constantly, you know, how do you make them comfortable and feel like normal in that state of artificial intelligence? Well, you put them in a world that's more akin to their own, which would be like 50 years in the future from our current time, basically. So I think we're going to see like basically a VR kind of full dive VR version of Future World, and that's what it is.
I have no prediction to give on that. I'm lost at this point.
That's the thing about Westworld. You can like just draw up predictions and theories for hours.
And it's never too outlandish.
Yeah, you never know what they're going to do. And like, you know, that's one of the problems with why when I brought up the idea about binging versus watching it as it comes out, because a lot of people that were watching Westworld as it came out were able to figure out things just because, you know, and it's not a fault of the show. It's actually a strength of the show that they properly foreshadowed things. They properly laid the groundwork for things that people were able to figure it out before they were supposed to. Because, you know, you put a bunch of Redditors with microscopes in front of the internet, you know, and they're going to tear apart every single frame and try to find stuff. And through that, people were able to figure out, like by like episode 2 of the first season, that like William was the Man in Black. You know, people were able to kind of figure that kind of stuff out, where, you know, you're a little bit less likely to do that if you're just binging it straight, because you don't have those time between the episodes to really just start thinking about it all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm very glad I got William later, and the same with Bernard being a host. Victor Bernard was going to be a host, like in the first episode. My buddy's like, haha, he's obviously a robot. Like and he was just sort of sitting there uncomfortably. And I gave up on theory the very episode that they showed him as a host, because they showed what his son dying and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, obviously he's not. And they pulled the rug out from under. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're watching this, you know, like we're doing right now, and you have an entire week to just sit here and think about these theories and look at a recap and look at this. Oh, look, Bernard had the scar in this scene, but not in this one. You know,
yeah, and share theories on something like Reddit, you know,
that kind of takes away some of the magic from it, I think. So I'm trying to stay as far away.
The same way. I like being caught up in the story as it unfolds. You know, I don't really like trying to figure it out ahead of time.
I like trying to figure some of it out. I don't like to read the Reddit threads where they're actually, I like to figure it out based on just having watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like to try to like look at like, you know, still shots like from the episode where they've like magnified it and tried to clear up the image and find like little tiny details. It's like, that's a bit too much for me. But I do like to kind of like think about like what could happen. And a lot of times, you know, I'll make like wild guesses that are way off from what's going to end up happening. But
and I feel like that's part of it too. Like part of what's enjoyable about watching TV shows is, you know, you think you see the plot twist coming, but they might be different from what you expected. So you learn a little bit, you know, you learn a little bit about storytelling, about, you know, what the show is trying to tell you. And for me, at least, that's really enjoyable. Like I like just, I don't know, feeling like I got something out of watching the show, as opposed to, oh, well, the plot is this and that, and I figured it out, so now I'm just gonna sit here and wait for the show to end.
Yeah, you want that you want to make neural pathways. You don't want to just like be on easy, right, just like guided through it.
The only thing I'll do with a wiki open is Dark Souls.
Well, that's part of the journey that you're talking about. It's just like, you know, an Agatha Christie novel. It's like, and then there were none. You want to be impressed by what the author is doing. You want to follow the twists and the turns as they're guiding you down that way. You don't want to have somebody, you know, yelling out from behind the author, you know, here's the Cliff Notes version, here's what happens. No, let the author tell the story. I don't want to hear from you.
Right.
Yeah.
What does the red bird mean? You know, like, let me think about it. Don't just tell me.
Precisely.
That's pretty much it. I mean, we covered most of what's in the episode. It's really worth.
I feel like we gave Akecheta a little bit of short shrift because there's so much more to discuss about it. But
I don't know if there's a lot to like break down and discuss about his story so much as just to appreciate.
Yeah, just the elegance of that. But I mean, what Ghost Nation does next is going to be, you know, pivotal. So that'll be really important these next 2 weeks.
you had mentioned before we started recording the podcast that you'd been listening constantly to the piano cover of Heart-Shaped Box that they made for this show.
Yes. Yes, I have.
And that's like another part of like what I was saying, like with Akecheta's story in this episode, where it's mainly focused on him. We may not have been spending all of our time discussing it, but it's more just like about appreciating how they did it and the emotion they were able to get out of it. And that was one of the key things, was the use of that song in the scene where he's wandering through Westworld's like back end, through the Delos, back end of Westworld, and all the behind the scenes stuff. And he's going down the escalator, and just kind of like his like slow kind of mournful stroll through that back end, getting eventually to the deep storage area where all the hosts that have malfunctioned have been placed, and the realizations that he came to there set with that song is just like a beautiful scene that's just very emotional. But there's not a lot to talk about beyond that,
Yeah, you see that and you experience it and you were there, and it's kind of hard to recap that as much more than we have. But yeah, very strong. I don't know if that I agree that this was the best episode of Westworld, but that was definitely one of the greatest moments, not just in Westworld, but for maybe modern TV. That was really, really affecting.
Yeah, it's very emotional. I love scenes like that. So that was a great scene for television. I think that pretty much brings us to an end of the discussion for this episode. So now is when we talk about what's coming up in the week ahead. So on Friday, June 15th, 2018, Goliath returns to Amazon. 12 Monkeys returns to Sci-Fi. The Ranch back on Netflix. Voltron's back on Netflix as well. Sunday, June 17th, 2018, The Affair returns on Showtime. Deep State debuts on Epix. Shades of Blue debuts on NBC. I'm probably going to butcher this. La Balada de Hugo Sanchez airs on Netflix. Monday, June 18th, 2018, Marvel's Spider-Man on Disney XD. Tuesday, June 19th, Drunk History on Comedy Central. Love is Blank on OWN. Wednesday, June 20th, Yellowstone on Paramount and Young and Hungry on Freeform. And on Thursday, June 21st, Queen of the South on USA, Shooter on USA, Detroiters on Comedy Central, Take Two on ABC, Next of Kin on Sundance Now. And then lastly, on Friday, June 22nd, Luke Cage returns for season 2 on Netflix. So I always bring this up with Will when we go through like all these shows premiering. This is summer.
Just summer.
This is such a strange time for television. Like summer was reruns. That was summer for like us growing up.
Yeah, now you get to look forward to the end of Westworld and all of Luke Cage instead of watching reruns of Golden Girls.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if Luke Cage carries on like the second half of the first season of Luke Cage, then I might want to switch over and watch some Golden Girls instead.
It was a solid 7 episodes of Luke Cage.
Well, which one is that? Marvel's Golden Girls?
Marvel's Golden Girls. Oh man!
Watch the hell.
Now I want that.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Okay, so next week, Will is going to be joining us again to talk about Legion, and I believe we might structurally work things around a little differently. Legion had its final 2 episodes of the season, and there's a lot to discuss there, so I might hold off on next week's Westworld until the week after, and we'll just talk about the last 2 episodes. If we do that, would either of you be up for joining us?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so like in 2 weeks, and we'll discuss the last 2 episost.
Sounds good.
It's going to be a good time.
Okay, so you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Alex. He is at, Mágico de Mexico?
That's correct.
With J's.
With a J. Yeah, with 2 J's.
Yes. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. If that doesn't work, thetotalscreen.blogspot.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel, so check all of that out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night. If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very